Hi, BookTube. So, as it's the 10th anniversary of Nonfiction November, and I have participated in all 10 years of this readathon, my favorite readathon here on BookTube, I thought it would be fun to go back over this last decade, can you believe it or not, and share with you my favorite nonfiction book from each November. And I have my notebook here with my statistics of sorts of like just the amount, because I thought it'd be interesting to see the amount of nonfiction books I read each month, and then my favorite or some runner-ups of sorts for some of the years. It was, I will say, some years were much more difficult than others to pick a favorite book. The very first year, I only read 2 nonfiction books. And I will say, I do read nonfiction throughout the entire year. Probably a fourth to a third of the books I read each month are nonfiction. I would like it to be a half, and some months it is that. But roughly, I think on average, like a fourth to a third. But in the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, I have solely or almost solely read nonfiction books for November. So the first year I read 2 books, and that was all the way back in 2015. And I had recently discovered BookTube in the fall of, I want to say it was the fall of 2014. And this book had made its rounds here on BookTube. This is Fiercely Happy, a funny book about horrible things by Jenny Lawson. I'm trying to get this lighting right. And sorry for the bad lighting, I should say, because it's November here in Portland, and it's dark and rainy. I have all the lights on possible, and if I waited for sunlight to help brighten things up, I would probably be waiting, I feel like, a week to film. And as it's Monday and I'm off today from work, I wanted to utilize this time. So sorry for the bad lighting, but we're just going to work with what we have. But yeah, so I had heard about this book on BookTube because Jenny Lawson writes a blog, and I feel like that's where most people know about her from, but I didn't follow her blog. But she also wrote Let's Pretend This Never Happened, and I read that book. And one other of hers that I read that was more recently published. But Jenny Lawson suffers from like mental and physical illnesses, and so she's on a variety of medication, and then she's just trying to get through her daily life, but she's also quirky. She collects like little figurines that are taxidermy, like goofy taxidermy, like this raccoon. And so this book is her going about her life and the different things she gets up to. And each chapter is just a couple of pages, and some are funnier than others. Some are like almost heartbreaking in a way, just with all the things that she has to deal with. But yeah, it was interesting and funny. Okay, so then in 2016, I read 10 books. So I went from 2 to 10. And yeah, from going forward, it's going to get a little bit more books each month. But I'm only going to share with you 1 or 2 each for each year, because otherwise we'll be here all day about to go through all of them. But yeah, I read 10 books that year. And so my 2 favorites were, because for this one I couldn't pick just one. But I read Candace Millard's book, Destiny of the Republic, A Tale of Madness, Medicine, and the Murder of a President. And this is about the murder of President Garfield, the assassination. And this was the very first Candace Millard book I had read. And I love all of her books. I've since read several others, and I cannot recommend her strongly enough. And I feel like all these books, that goes for all these books. Without saying. Stacy Schiff, The Witches, Salem 1692. Previous to this, I had read Cleopatra and loved it. This one is a much more substantial book, and it's probably because Stacy Schiff had much more documents to go with than with Cleopatra. But this is following the Salem witch trials, and it is the best book I've read on the Salem witch trials. It includes everything you could think of, and it's just a very well-rounded, well-thought-out, well-told story. Okay, so then, let me see here. 2017, I read 13 books. And my favorite of that year was Behave. This is a white cover, so let me turn it down a bit so you can see it, maybe. Behave, The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst by Robert M. Sapolsky. And I was just fascinated by this book. If you ever took a biology class in high school or middle school or college, what have you, and didn't get on with it, Don't let the word biology or this is a science book. I'm trying to make this work, but I don't think it's going to. But it's just a white cover with a human on there. It's like split in half between green and red dots. So not the most interesting cover either. But yeah, I strongly recommend this book because it was just absolutely fascinating and well told as well. And I'm one that I did like biology through school. But it's nothing I pursued as my career. But yes, for like yeah, I was saying, like, if you like biology or not, this is well worth your time because, you know, we're all humans, and so this is all about the things that we go through. Okay, so in 2018, I read 22 books, and I have 3 favorites to share with you, and like not a runner-up, but something I wanted to highlight because it's a book I own, and that is Paperback Crush by Gabrielle Moss. I was born in the 80s, but I mainly grew up in the 90s, so I read a lot of these books that are featured, and I just wanted to recommend this book for anyone who had read these books as a kid. It features different authors, it highlights different series, and just gives you like just a feel for that time period as readers. And so it's just interesting in itself, even if you didn't grow up reading these books, just to see the kind of books that were available to teenagers at that time, because the YA, wasn't a thing as it is now. So yeah, there's this one. And then as for my favorites, let's see here. The Brontes, Wild Genius on the Moors, the story of 3 sisters by Juliet Barker. It does focus on the 3 sisters, but it also includes a biography like the whole family, because it starts out with the biography of the father, and it does include their brother Bronson as well. And this book is just remarkable. If you haven't read any of the Brontes' works, or if you're just slightly familiar with them, don't let that deter you from picking this book up, or especially if you like their writing. I highly recommend this book. It was just absolutely fascinating, like just the genius of these siblings, and just the tragedy of the brother Bronson, who, if it wasn't for alcoholism, what works we could have got from him as well. So yeah, I strongly recommend this book. And then we have Anne Frank's Diary, a graphic adaptation. This is adapted by Ari Folman and illustrated by David Polanski. This was just I really like this. Like, I looked at my notes, and I had read Anne Frank's Diary the year before, like the written format, and then the following year, for Nonfiction November, I read this graphic novel, and it was just wonderfully told. It captures the essence of, I feel like, the diary perfectly. And for kids who are, put off from that book, I feel like this would be a good gateway to that. Or, for kids who struggle with reading and things like that. Okay, and then let me see here. Okay, and then I feel like I might have mixed things up, because the Brontes was for 2017. And then, 2018 I read 22, but I can't remember exactly where I left off here. For 2018, I read 22 books, and for those, I wanted to feature the Anne, yeah, sorry, I took like where I left off. But yeah, the Anne Frank for 2018, and that doesn't exactly matter. It doesn't have to be perfect, but with telling all this, because I'm just sharing my favorites from each month. Or each year, I should say. But yeah, so for 2018, it's Anne Frank's Diary, I Contain Multitudes, The Microbes Within Us, and A Grander View of Life by Ed Yong. And I have since read another of his books that recently came out, The Life Between Us. I want to say something like that. Don't quote me. It's like I read it like last year. But this one was fantastic. And then to pair with that, because this is about all the different microbes. We are microbes, microorganisms, more than we are, like, I feel like our own cells, reading this book. And to go with that, the same month, I read Never Home Alone, From Microbes to Millipedes, Camel Crickets and Honeybees, The Natural History of Where We Live by Rob Dunn. And these bright colors are just not picking up that well. Well, here we go. And so this is about the critters that live in your house, whether you keep an immaculate house or not. there are organisms and like little spiders and little things all over your house, whether your house is spotless or not, that they're there. And so these two, I feel like were really good paired together. Okay, so for 2019, I read 30 books, and I have two favorites to share with you, and then a book I wanted to highlight, a book I own. This is Moonbound, Apollo 11 and the Dream of Space Flight by Jonathan Feder-Vorm, and this is another graphic novel like the Anne Frank, where it's talking about the moon landing and the story there. So there's some of this is in color, some of it's in black and white. And it's like a mini history of how that came about. And so same kind of thing, like I feel like for kids especially, or for any adults as well, if you were interested in learning about the trips to the moon with Apollo 11, then this would be a good gateway into that. Or you just read it on its own, and you don't have to. I haven't read any more about this topic since then, but this contained everything you want to know about it, I feel like. Okay, and then my two favorites were The House on Nauset Marsh, a Cape Cod memoir by Wyman Richardson. And this is a fantastic book. I really like nature writing, and this is all about his time on Cape Cod. He has a house there, and it's just so quaint and warming. And I feel like I've been there even though I've never visited. And then the other book is Vulture, The Private Life of an Unloved Bird by Katie Fallon. And at the time, I was living in North Carolina, where there was turkey vultures on every walk I went on. You always saw them circling in the sky or roosting in different places. And so, of course, they caught my eye. And so I hunted out a book about them, and I was just completely captured by this book and by this vultures and how how they go about their lives, and how they are villainized as this title talks about. Their unloved birds, and she does talk about the different like Disney characters and things like that, and different Disney movies and what have you that feature vultures in not the best light. They're always seen as like these evil henchmen of sorts, but how that's, you shouldn't look at them like that. They do serve a purpose, and they're not evil at all. And so if you're interested in birds, or you feel like vultures are evil, then I would recommend this book to enlighten you, I guess. And then for 2020, I read 18 books, and so my favorite from that year was The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt by Edmund Morris. And this is the first book in the trilogy. I recommend all of the books in this trilogy, but this is the very first one by Edmund Morris. And the other ones were Theodore Rex and Colonel Roosevelt. Theodore Rex was my favorite of the three, because Theodore Rex was focusing on his presidency. But this is like how he got into being the president, and he just led a remarkable life. I feel like no matter the author, like you probably couldn't read a boring biography of Theodore Roosevelt just because of like the character he was and all the adventures he had. But the topic of Theodore Roosevelt paired with this fantastic writer, you just couldn't go wrong reading this biography if you're interested in learning about Theodore Roosevelt. Okay, so let's see. For 2021, I read 23 books, and I have two books to share with you. Both of them are very different from each other, but A Place in the Woods by Helen Hoover, and it's illustrated by her husband Adrian. And this is about a couple who were living in Chicago and very much like not well to do, but they had really successful careers, but they decided to drop it all and move up to the north of Minnesota, middle of nowhere, because they knew if they didn't do it then at their age that they wouldn't be able to do it like 10 years from now per se, because they wouldn't want to be that isolated as they were aging and getting older and more prone to sicknesses and different things like that. You're not able to get around as much and chop all that firewood and things like that. So I just thought, like, what a brave thing for them to do, like something that they both wanted for the longest time. They had to like put it off, and then to actually go for it when they were very successful at that time, with the jobs that they had, and to just leave it all. I just found that fascinating. And then like in the northern Minnesota and all of that, and just like all of the animals that they encounter, and up like starting at this whole living in the woods and upkeeping their house. I love stories like that, so this is like catnip to me. And then the other book is a biography of the Beatles by Bob Spitz. And I have listened to the Beatles, like I've heard it on the radio, things like that, but these aren't, or this like musical group aren't something I have focused on, or I wouldn't say they're not my favorites at all, I would say. But this biography was fantastic. Like, you don't have to like the Beatles to like this book, is what I'm saying, because I don't necessarily love their music. I mean, I like it, but I'm not like a fangirl of it by no means. But this covers all of the Beatles, and like from how they started and how they became famous, and like these crazy, like, talk about fangirls, my goodness, how that whole phenomenon happened, and then it goes through their lives. And yeah, Bob Spitz, this is a great biography of them. Okay, I would say I pair it with listening to their music, because I did like sometimes when he talked about how different songs were created, or when they were composing them, I would listen to each song as he would talk about that. He didn't go through every single song or anything like that, but when he did, I listened to some of their music. Okay, so then for 2022, I read 33 nonfiction books for Nonfiction November, and my favorite of that year was Robert A. Caro's The Years of Lyndon Johnson, Master of the Senate, and this won the Pulitzer Prize. This is a chunky book. It's, I don't know, probably like 1,000 pages, something like that, but it's worth it. This is a trilogy. You don't have to read all three. I read the first one and I jumped to this one because I read the first one just to get an idea of him. Not this year, but I read it like a previous year. And then I just jumped to this one because this was seemed like the most interesting part after getting a foundation for how he, came into the political world, kind of thing. But this one is really good. It's worth your time. And Lyndon B. Johnson is not a nice guy, I will say. He is cutthroat and not nice to women, not nice to anyone, I feel like. He's very much a go-getter, and he's going to walk right over you to get where he wants to be. But it's still a good biography, and he was still part of history. So to know about that, yeah, this was a good book for that. And then a physical book that I own that I wanted to showcase is Siesta Lane, One Cabin, No Running Water, and a Year Living Green by Amy Minato. This is a book I found at a library book sale, and it's about a local author. This is about her time in Eugene, Oregon, but she's now living in Portland, Oregon. But the writing was just she focused on these like minute details that it stuck with me ever since. For example, she was talking about boiling potatoes on a rainy day like today, and just like the steam, how it warms you as you're cooking, as you're chopping it up, it warms you up, and then as you're cooking it, and then you're eating it, and it's like the simple life, how she, it's just like she makes a point of that. And then her writing is very, I don't know, just how it's told is very like lyrical in a sense. And then when I look up the author, she writes poetry as well, so it makes sense how the writing has this like smooth quality to it. So there's that. And then let me see here. For 2023, I read 42. So that's the most I read of all 10 years, was 42 books. I don't know about this year. I haven't finished yet. Finished reading through this month, but I read 42 books, and they're both the two books I wanted to showcase are books I own. And so let me see here. We have essays of E.B. White. This, I read, Charlotte's Web and Stuart Little, Trumpet of the Swan, and I didn't know that he wrote nonfiction until I stumbled upon this book. And he wrote for like newspapers and things like that, or articles. And so this is a collection of some of his essays, and I just ate it up. I want to read more from him. And he has a couple other, compilations, like bind-ups of his different essays that I want to read. And then my favorite was of last year was Sally Carragher's Home to the Wilderness, A Personal Journey. And this is her autobiography of how she became a nature writer. She's most famous for One Day on Beetle Rock, and she went to different areas of the West and stayed there for months to really get a feel for those areas and like the animals that she was encountering, and then told those individual stories of and how they're all interlinked. So she'll talk about like the deer, the mouse, the bird, different things like that, and how it's like a circle of life kind of thing. And so this is how she became a nature writer, and I just loved this. I love her writing, so yeah, how can I not love a writing of hers about her own life that she lived. It was kind of sad to read about how her mother and her, they didn't get along, but yeah, all journeys in life have good and bad in them. Okay, so for 2024, so far I'm filming this on November 11th, this Monday, and I've read 12 books so far. So I wanted to share my favorite books so far to round out these selections. And so my favorite book was Still Meadow and Sugar Bridge by Gladys Taylor and Barbara Webster, illustrated by Barbara Webster's husband, Edward Shenton. And I'll show you some of the illustrations here. And this is just month by month, them going through the year, and they're writing letters to each other. Gladys Taylor in Still Meadow, she is in Connecticut, and then Sugar Bridge, Barbara Webster, she is in Pennsylvania on the outskirts of Philadelphia. And so they're just like sharing their year and little things that are happening with their dogs, or what's going on in their yards, or like plumbing and different issues, just two women going about their life. And so this is like what the actual houses look like, and then here are the two authors. And this was written back in, I want to say like the 50s or something, so it's like gives you a feel as well in a way of that time period. This was written in 1953. So yeah, I wanted to end it with talking about my favorite so far for Nonfiction November 2024. So all in total, as of right now, I've read 205 Nonfiction November books, and so I just think it's so cool. What BookTube has brought to my life in a sense, and if I hadn't have found BookTube, like the very first book on here, Fiercely Happy, I found because of BookTube, and many others as well. And so I just find that kind of like reading journey and the influence that BookTube has, I just find it fascinating. And who's to say if I hadn't found BookTube or Nonfiction November, how many nonfiction books I would have found. I don't know. Much less, I can tell you that. But yes, thanks BookTube. I'll talk to you later.